Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. All right, well, today we have Shawny Sena. She is a therapist in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She works exclusively with the LGBTQIA community, and she specializes in kids, teens, and adults, old souls of all ages who need to learn to play again. Shawny, thank you for coming on the Codependent podcast.
You're so welcome. I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. So, first question I ask everyone, really we're gathering definitions of codependency since it is such a vague, overused, understood term. So for you, Shawny, what is codependency?
I thought about this and I came up with a little 3-phrase thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay if we're okay. We're okay if you're okay. And I will do anything to make you okay.
Damn. I'm okay if you're okay.
I'm okay if we're okay.
We're okay if you're okay.
If you're okay.
And I will do anything to make sure you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I will do anything.
Yep.
Brilliant. And how did you describe codependency so well? Like how did you do
that? Life. Because I know it well. Mm-hmm. It's my old friend.
Right.
Who I'm still learning to love and tend to very gently these days. Yep.
And Shawny, can you share with myself and the listeners aspects of codependency, your little friend that you have dealt with in your past?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I thought of a few different examples. Here's a really innocuous one that happened literally 2 days ago. My spouse and I are sitting down to dinner and we're going to watch a movie. We talked about watching a movie. We get on HBO and there's a movie that I've been wanting to watch. And I say, oh, can we watch this one? And then I say, oh, I remember that you said you wanted to watch that one, which they had said, like a week ago that they wanted to watch that one. Should we watch that one? And then they were like, yeah. And then they were like, okay, wait a minute, but don't you want to watch the one that you just said? If you want to watch that, then we can watch it. And it took actual deliberate internal force for me to say yeah, I do want to watch the one that I said I wanted to watch. So that's the one that we're going to watch. Claiming that desire and then making a choice and asking my spouse to make that choice. That's a very day-to-day. Here's another one that's a little
really quick, Shawny, before the second example, because I think it ties so well with the first rule. I'm okay if we're okay. And here you were potentially disrupting that by asserting your desire to watch a spontaneous, unplanned for, organic, look at, maybe they right, you didn't know that that movie was available when you had made that agreement, right? Sometimes things change and just you stated this desire,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden, right, you suddenly were conscious of, uh-oh, that
Yes.
that might mean we are not okay.
Yes. Because you said this before, and now I
Mhm.
remember that.
Right. So you were not okay because we potentially
Right.
could not be okay.
Yes.
And
Yep.
then the deliberate force it took for you to say, let's stick with the spontaneous desire that I just spoke.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So next example you have.
Here's my next example. And this one is not so bad anymore, but it used to be really intense. When I would get sick and I would have to call in sick at a job, I would say to myself, like I would call in, you know, "Oh, I can't come in," and then hang up. And then I would think, they think that I'm faking it. They
Mm.
think I'm not sick. And there would be all this panic. And then eventually I would get to a place where I would say, maybe I am faking it. Maybe I'm not sick. This feeling of maybe their perception of me is the real one, and my perception of me is false.
Mhm. What would happen?
I mean, I would never call and be like, I changed my mind, I'm coming in. I am proud of myself that I never got to that place. But it would be very uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I would have to do a lot of sitting with that. And then, you know, this corresponded with my own like kind of first foray into a big therapeutic relationship where I saw a therapist for like 5 years. And so we did a lot of work on like, yep, it's true that you are sick. It's also true that they might think that you're lying. What is it like to be with that discomfort of like knowing that they might think that you're lying, and also trust in the truth of your reality, which is that you are sick and you don't have to be like you know, dying or going to the hospital to not come into work.
Right. Trusting your reality.
Mm-hmm.
I sense that is a huge factor in healing from
Yes.
codependency.
Yes.
Right. I have a feeling, and in our healing journey, we try and assert that feeling. And then we question if we have the right to feel that way,
Yes.
potentially backtrack or feel
Mm-hmm.
guilty for saying anything. Right. It's that lack of trust in reality in
Yes.
ourselves.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So 2 day ago example, employment, feeling sick, calling out sick example.
Mm-hmm.
Any other examples of codependency?
Yeah. This one I think is a bit more abstract, but I do feel like it ties into what we're going to talk about today, which is that, you know, when I was in my own like coming out process, which took years and years and years, I would have a lot of like preemptive guilt about wanting to date anyone who was not a cis man, a cisgender man, uh, because I had dated cisgender men. And there was a feeling of like, they will think that I'm exploiting them or not real in my desire. They will think that I'm being gross, and they're going to be like hurt by me. So I'm not going to do it, which was really a way to avoid them rejecting me,
Hmm.
you know. Um
And they were people you were interested in,
mhm.
or thought you were interested in, but doubted you were interested in and
Yes.
worried about.
Knew I was interested in on a body intuitive desire level.
Mhm.
Doubted that again, talking about that reality, that experience was true or legitimate, like legitimate to be followed, and then choosing not to take any action because believing that like illegitimacy would lead to harm to others or rejection of me.
Mm. How long did you hang out in that not wanting to date cisgender men,
Mm-hmm.
physically wanting? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. 22 to 27. And maybe, I mean, probably longer than that. That's when it like really kind of went into conscious thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it in a different circumstance and with a different relationship to codependency, it probably would have come out a lot earlier.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the Codependent podcast. I learned about cisgender thanks to my education as a
Mm-hmm.
therapist later in school. Can you give us the Codependent 101 definition of cisgender?
Definitely. So cisgender basically just means a person who is not trans. And when I say a person who is not transgender, I'm speaking to like the internal experience of having your perceived gender that can exist on physical, emotional, spiritual, like all sorts of different kind of planes, right? Align with the gender that was assigned to you at birth, which means that like somebody looked at your body, and it could have been an ultrasound technician or a midwife or a doctor or a parent or some adult looked at your body when you were very, very small, saw your external genitals and interpreted them and named them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that aligns with your internal emotional, physical, spiritual experience of gender, then that is cisgender. You are a cisgender person. If it doesn't, then you might be a transgender person. And there's all sorts of different ways that we can like mix and match and experience gender. So there's not just one way to be trans. There's also just not one way to be cis.
Mm-hmm.
So trans and cis are the shortening. We're just taking the word gender away of those. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You said that so eloquently. I would have fumbled and bumbled my way through that. So thank you. And reflecting on what codependency means to you, how it's come up in your own life, and your specialty,
Mm-hmm.
how do codependency and queerness interrelate?
I mean, I think that they interrelate a lot because anytime you have an experience where you have a marginalized identity, often a message from the people who don't hold that marginalized identity is you should adapt, shift, change something about yourself to fit in with us. Right? So we could apply that across a lot of different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we could apply it racially, where we have Black, Indigenous people of color who are forced either institutionally or just energetically, culturally, to like assimilate
Right.
and to turn down their cultural experience and their history in order to get a job, date, get housing, whatever. You know, we could talk about it with ability level, where folks say like, no, we're not going to let you work from home, even though that would be better for your physical and mental and emotional health.
Mm-hmm.
You need to turn down that part of your life to come be with us.
Right.
And with sexuality and gender, it can be really interesting because often we experience on some level conscious or unconscious, that when we're really small. And it's actually super duper important that the people around us accept us, love us, take care of us, meet our needs, right? But there's a feeling of like, you're different and you need to turn down your difference to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at like the internal messaging of codependency, it's, I gotta make myself small in order to stay safe in relationship. I like to, a thing that I talk about a lot in my own life and in the work that I do is like, it's kind of like being a contortionist. So something happens, and if I'm a contortionist, I just like contort my body to adapt. And then I'm like, oh, I guess this is the way it is. I'm just going to stay contorted. I can do that. That's fine. And then something else happens, and I got to like contort again. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll stay here. And it becomes less and less sustainable.
Right. It's exhausting.
Yes, it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. So, right, here's this marginalized community.
Mm-hmm.
And for you and your specialty, queer folk. Is that a cool thing to say? Is that what the kids are saying these days?
I love the word folks. Gender neutral term. Love it.
And right from the majority who are heterosexual cisgender people, in so many words, the message is turn down your difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then for you, in your experience in helping people with their codependency, it's also messages of stay small, stay quiet, don't take up too much space.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing those connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in preparing for the interview, we talked about how codependency and queerness relate in family of origin
Mm-hmm.
and chosen families.
Mm-hmm.
Before you answer that, let's define or understand what are families of origin and chosen families.
So families of origin are the family that you grew up with. Sometimes that's very clear. Like, I have a mom and a dad, okay, that's the family I grew up with. Sometimes it's, I have a mom who I never met, and I have a foster family, or I have 10 foster families, right? I would still consider those all family of origin. So it is like the stories. I'm going to start over.
Okay.
Should I start all the way over with families of origin?
It's up to you.
So I would say like families of origin, sometimes it can be very simple, like here are the people I grew up with, and sometimes it can be very large, which is like here is my history, my like cultural lineage, the messages that I grew up with, right? My aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, grandparents, Sunday school teachers, all the, like, it's a wide network, but they are the people who told us how to be in the world and brought us up.
Right.
Chosen family is the family that you find usually in adulthood or on your way to adulthood, who fit who you are and who feel good to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody, even if you are not queer or trans, has a chosen family. Sometimes that's your biological family and you choose them again. Sometimes it's not. But for folks who are queer and trans, the term chosen family takes on even more significance because often in our histories, our families cut us off and we didn't have access to them anymore. So we chose a new family. And there's a lot of examples and history of creating different structures for families, new structures, new rules, new ways of taking care of each other, new names, all sorts of different things that feel like they fit better. And here's a like pithy way to talk about it. There's a writer whose name I can't remember. He's a gay writer. He's very famous. He's dead now, but he wrote a series of like deeply gay novellas, and he called it Your Biological Family and Your Logical Family.
Wow.
So you can always refer back to that.
Yeah. Biological and logical.
Mm-hmm.
And what's pithy mean? I know I've heard it, but
it means like true but a little bit smartass.
Pithy.
Yeah.
Biological and logical.
Yeah. That's my biological family, and that's my logical family.
Awesome. And how have you seen codependency come up with families of origin, chosen families in the queer community?
With a biological family, often there is like implicit, which means unspoken but understood, right? So like vibes, right? And explicit, which means externally spoken. Rules or expectations.
Right.
So like an explicit thing is like, we're not going to tell grandma that you're trans. She can't handle it, or she would get really angry. So, like I said earlier, the solution is you hide so that grandma doesn't get mad at us or get confused. Right? So we have that kind of turning down. Sometimes it's a little bit more implicit, where we have things like when my sibling brings their cisgender heterosexual boyfriend or girlfriend home, they are treated like one of the family. When I bring the person that I'm dating home, embodiment of my identities, right, in this relationship, they are treated politely, but very different. They are not going to get like invited to the cabin or asked to go on a shopping trip with my mom or something like that. Those like intimacy kind of things.
Right.
Yeah. And so again, you know, we have this like, you're different, and the solution to your difference is to like stay really small for our comfort. It's better for you to stay small than for us to confront our discomfort. And there can be a big like, oh damn, I guess they're right. I guess that is what I should do. And this is where it can kind of go over into chosen family, right? Where we have an internalization of that idea. And then now we're in our logical family, folks that we've chosen, but it's really easy for those dynamics to come out again. There's a lot of talk about this and me. I am too much. What I want is too much. What I need is too much. What I want to ask for is too much. What I like is too much. And nobody will give it to me. So I should just be okay with what I'm getting.
Right. And how do experiences like you're already starting to hint at with marginalization, with transphobia, with homophobia influence codependency?
Yeah. Well, I think it like there's a cultural message that says your desire is dangerous. And I think about like with queer folks, and we see this with trans folks too, like a very clear message that historically has linked things like queerness to things like pedophilia or crime. Which it always makes me giggle because that feels like my embodiment of that is so like, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the history is like very clear, and that messaging is still here. It's still here now. And so if we have a cultural message that says like our desire is dangerous, then embodying and inhabiting that desire is going to be a really big task.
Right.
And if we have like an internal kind of mountain to climb to embody that desire, to me it makes it all the easier for like my old friend codependency to like sneak in and say like, hey, a really good way to like stay safe and loved and cared for, what if you believed that your desire was dangerous?
Mm-hmm.
And you followed the rules that I'm going to tell you, that I'm going to lay out for you. Right. Even though those rules are usually always lies. When in fact, the task of like naming and embodying our desires and discerning when we can step into those desires and when we can't, because we can't 100% of the time, mm-hmm. right? That act of naming and embodying and discerning individually and in relationships, that's where I think balance lives. That's where things like peace and happiness and love and connection and safety live. It's not about like following a rule book that codependency says things like, I can't think of a queer example. I go right to very heterosexual examples, mm-hmm. which are things like don't sleep with them on the first date so that they'll like you, mm-hmm. Codependency says like, if you follow these rules, you'll always be happy. When in fact it is the being brave and actually like tuning into your authentic desires that leads to happiness. It's a lot more complicated. It would be easier to just like follow the rules. But that doesn't involve us.
Right.
We aren't in there. Just like, I said, like, I'm okay if we're okay, and we're okay if you're okay. Where am I? I'm working really hard to make sure you're okay, but where are my desires, needs, boundaries, interests? Nowhere to be found.
Right. I wonder if to an extreme in safer environments where one has turned down their gender or sexuality completely, that is also codependency to an extreme, because they don't want to come out in however that looks for them because of what it would do to the family, to the friends, to the colleagues.
Yes. Well, and not just come out, but live. Right. Like, I think often coming out is kind of just the first step. Not even the first step. It's like the 20th step, but then there are 800 steps to go. Because, once you come out, that's a series of choices of like telling folks things about yourself while still having boundaries. Maybe sometimes folks come out in a way that is very boundaryless, right? But then, are you gonna wear the thing? Are you gonna go by the name? Are you gonna talk about your date?
Right.
Here are a bunch of choices that have to be made in real time. And we have that discernment in real time.
And if I were raised in a family of origin, if I even have a chosen family, if I live in a culture where I have learned over time about, right? Like we've read articles, we've seen it on TV, like in pop culture, the impact that coming out can have, right? We've seen the person come out to their grandma and it didn't go well.
Yep.
So as a consequence of all of that, potentially an individual could decide, like, I can't. This is going to impact others so much, and I'm so, maybe not consciously, but I'm very dependent on feeling safe, feeling connected and imbalanced. Just, I can't.
Yeah, I can't risk it. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you can't. I also don't want to like poop on anyone's choices here, right? You know, because people have to practice discernment.
Right.
Discernment's a really important skill. And I would never say, you know, like, yeah, I think that's a terrible decision. But I would say, where is there room for authenticity in your life?
Right.
If it's not at work, if it's not with your family of origin, if it's not in your relationship, where is it? Can it be somewhere? And if not, would you like to try to have it be somewhere?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a thing that you would like to move towards?
Right. Where is authenticity? Where is there room for authenticity in your life?
Even if it's just in a very small space, and even if it's all by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
One of the lovely things that folks talk about in like queer clinical theory, so that just means like when therapists talk about how to bring queerness as a concept into the therapy room, they talk about, instead of coming out, which implies like exposure, you know, like I'm gonna open my heart and share it with everybody, and then they can reject or accept me, you know, and tragedy or happily ever after will follow.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about, what if we shifted the lens to coming in? Who gets to come in?
Wow.
Who has earned our trust? Who has proven themselves? This could be another word for boundaries, talking about codependency, right? Who has earned our trust to come in? And so if coming out at this moment is not okay, not acceptable, for whatever reason, even if that reason is, you know, my old friend codependency, and I would love for that to shift, doesn't matter. That's still a good enough reason, in my opinion. But does anybody get to come in?
Mm-hmm. When you are working with clients who are dealing with codependency and also happen to be queer, right? Like, one does not cause the other, but
No.
no,
But the stars align sometimes.
right? Being marginalized, dealing with trans and homophobia, it makes sense that you would be so conscious of others when people have obviously been very conscious of you and your sexuality and gender. So, what are the initial steps when you notice codependency coming up in their work with you?
Yes. So it's interesting because a lot of my work I do with children and with teens. So it's a little less like direct. Sometimes the queerness and transness is less direct. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very direct. But I like to think of it as like codependency preventative care.
Literally.
Just like going to the dentist, you know.
That's when it starts for many of
Yeah.
us.
And so I will say things, you know, in the type of therapy that I do, which is play therapy and things that are called like client centered, which just means like the client decides where we go. Even if they're 4 years old, they decide what we play, what we talk about, if we talk at all, whatever. So I'll say things like, you know, in here, you're the boss. You decide. And sometimes you see children who, you know, they'll pick up a toy and they look at it and then they look at me and they want permission. They want, you know, to say like, is it okay if I play with this? Or I kind of want to play with this and I feel like I shouldn't. What do you think, therapist lady? You know, should I play with this? And I'll say like, you know, in here you can play with anything you want, but it's your choice. Another thing that I'll do is, this actually goes for a lot of these things go for everybody. It's just a question of like, what language do we use? But the values are the same. So with like tweens and teens, where they, you know, they have their very important opinions and ideas, and things that they're very passionate about, totally developmentally appropriate, exactly how they should feel. But they sense that I might disagree, and like we go right into shutdown. Right? And so I'll say things like, you know, it's actually fine if we disagree. I care about you, and I always want to know what you have to say. And us disagreeing does not mean that I don't care. I trust you to know what you think and need, and I might think different things, and that's fine. And I feel like that's so, I hope it is. I feel like it is so powerful to be able to hear as a young person, one, you're in charge and your desire can lead the way. And two, that we can explore what it feels like to disagree and be connected.
Right.
To disagree and still be in relationship and know that my opinion of you has not changed at all, even if we don't agree about something.
Right.
And then with adults, it's kind of the same. You're the boss. It's okay if we disagree. You know, we just talk about it in more flowery language. Just things like, you know, sometimes I see a lot of clients who say things like, I'm worried that this is what you really think of me. I'm worried that you don't believe, want. Actually, I've had some clients, they talk about things like, I worry that what I'm saying or the way that I show up in session is actually really difficult for you. Like maybe I am triggering you, and how would I know? You know? And then we can do some really interesting things. Again, you're the boss. It's okay if we disagree. Of like, what is it like to trust that I'm taking care of myself and you don't have to take care of me?
Right.
What is it like to be in that space? It's usually real weird. It feels kind of very ungrounded and like kind of awful and kind of intriguing, you know, to know that like I don't necessarily, I'm not privy to everything Shawny thinks and feels, but I trust, or I'm trying to trust, I'm reaching towards trusting that she's taking care of herself and I don't have to monitor.
Right.
I don't have to monitor her, and I don't have to monitor me.
Right.
Just like the child who's looking for my permission to play. They don't do that for long. Eventually, we build up enough trust in the therapeutic relationship where they just come in and start doing whatever they need to do. And they trust that if I need to set a boundary, that I will. And they don't have to be looking at me all the time, wondering.
Right. I think, right, we've talked about different definitions or aspects of codependency, but codependency is looking and monitoring and not trusting.
Yes.
This is like, eventually Shawny's going to get upset. She's going to have a reaction. She's going to take back what she said I could do. Even though she said it,
I
needs to
don't
pay
trust
attention.
that. So I'll just look real quick.
Right.
You know.
And then we talked about like how queer folk, right, they have to turn down, right, not to disrupt, bother, impede, hurt others. So here they are showing up authentically, and like, oh God, is this too much for Shawny?
Yes.
Is this impacting her? And you're like, I am an adult. I have ways to take care of myself. You are not responsible for me. You're not responsible. So, last question, Shawny, I'm curious if you and I can workshop these 3 slogans that you had at the beginning for what healing looks like. So, instead of I'm okay if we're okay, I'm okay.
I'm okay. I would say like we're okay if we're okay. It's both of us showing up.
We're okay if we're okay. And then the second, we're okay if you're okay.
I would say like I'm okay if I'm okay.
Just focusing on I. And I will do anything to make sure you're okay. Now goes to
I think something like I trust that we can figure out how to be okay together.
Right? It's not all on you to do anything.
If we're in relationship, then it's on both of us. I have my piece and you have your piece. My piece is one small part of me. It is not all of me, but it is a part of me. And it's a part of me that I'm committed to. But I trust that we can both do this, that we can meet each other and be okay, or figure out what okayness looks like.
Right. Okay. So now, at the end, we're okay if we're okay. I'm okay if I'm okay. I trust that we can figure out how to be okay together.
Yes. Needs work. It's not quite as tight, I think, as the first one, but that's fine. You know.
Fine. I think we can capture codependency so well because we've been doing it for so long.
Oh yeah.
The healing is much shorter and messy, and which is why this podcast exists. And it is messy and unorganized, but we're
talk about pithy. I could like fire off a series of tweets, you know, and they would be so sharp about what codependency is. But I'm like, oh God, we're creating new things. Feels good. Feels bad. I like it. I'm okay.
Boundary.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Shawny. If listeners are interested in finding out more about you, where can they find you?
Yep. Well, I just mentioned Twitter, but in fact, I'm not on social media at all. So don't look for me there. You can find me on my website, which is www.shawnysena.com. And you can also email me, which is shawny@shawnysena.com. And my name will be spelled in the notes in the podcast, so you can figure that out there.
Yes, we'll put that in the show notes.
And I will say, I'm going to be very explicit because I know what this codependent dummy needs to hear, which is I actually really do want to hear from you. So if you feel the desire to email me, please do. We don't have to listen to the story that says like, Shawny said that, but I'm sure she's so busy. She doesn't want to hear from me. Even though I was really moved by that thing that she said, or I totally disagreed and I'm mad. I'm telling you clearly that I do.
Mm-hmm. You want to hear from.
I want to hear, and I'm asking you to trust that.
Right. Thank you for being so explicit.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, yes, we'll put that in the show notes. And listener, you are encouraged to reach out. And till next time. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.